Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the ABA 2019 Field Day and welcome to the Illawarra Beekeepers. Our first presenter has been a member at Illawarra since about 2013. He's a very active beekeeper. He's an amateur beekeeper but a full-time lover of bees and carer of bees. He works as a video producer and a photographer. He's to blame for many of the great images and videos that we have on our website, and he as well as developing our website and hosting it for us. He runs a website called Save Our Bees and runs a bee blog on saveourbees.com.au, and his name is Emmanuel Farrugia, and he is doing the videoing today, and hopefully he is ready to come up and start talking to you today about phones, cameras and beekeeping. Are you ready, Emmanuel? You're coming. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for coming down. It's great to have everyone here today. I assume most people here are beekeepers, is that right? Fantastic. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about camera phones and how we can use them as a beekeeper, observing the advantages versus the disadvantages, or the pros versus the cons. So talking about the pros, as far as camera phones are concerned, they're often available. So usually they're within reach. Most of us have a camera phone close by somewhere. They're small and discreet. Simple point and shoot. It's pretty easy to use a camera phone these days. You don't have to know too much about it. Automatic usually works fairly well. You're able to edit photos instantly on a camera phone, unlike a DSLR or a little 4/3 camera. You can distribute it and store it in the cloud quite easily. So distribution through Facebook, distribution through Instagram and the like. Great for candid shots. And they're fairly good in bright conditions. And also a good option for very tight, small spaces. So looking at the cons, as far as camera phones are concerned, they have limited manual control. They have a small sensor, which usually means noisy images. They have a small lens, usually about the size of your little fingernail or smaller. They're not too good in poor light or low light. I'm not sure if any of you have ever noticed, typically at a birthday party or something, when someone's blowing out the cake, if you haven't got a lot of light, they don't look too good. Limited zoom control. Low resolution on many models. And they can be difficult to hold steady because of their small form factor. And lastly, the touch screen is usually disabled when you've got beekeeper gloves on. Have everyone experienced that? So that's a pretty common complaint with beekeepers. So considering all those cons I've just mentioned here, we've listed on the left, I'll address some of these and maybe some solutions, and you might be able to come with some solutions of your own. But these are just some suggestions. So when we talk about limited manual control, there are many third-party apps that give us full control of the camera on a camera phone. Just about every control except for aperture, that's the f-stop value. I'm not sure if anyone has used an app with f-stop value that is controllable, but I'm yet to find one. Has anyone used one? No. As far as a small sensor is concerned, noisy images, to handle that we avoid dark locations, which isn't always possible. A small lens, we can use third-party lenses. So there are many macro lenses and wide-angle lenses and a couple of other options available for a few dollars. Not so good in poor light, so you can use an LED or reflector. A reflector can be just as simple as a white card a white sheet or a white piece of foam, polystyrene foam, that you can reflect the light back onto the subject. Limited zoom control if we move closer to the field of the frame, and I'll show you examples of this in a minute. I'm just going through in point form first. The low resolution we can combat by adjusting the settings in the camera for the highest resolution. Although a lot of cameras are very limited compared to some of our expectations maybe, but there usually is variable resolution in the settings. Because of their small form, as I mentioned before, to hold them steady can be an issue, and we can use camera support, a remote or a self-timer. So what I mean by the self-timer is in your camera settings, if you've got the camera fixed onto a tripod and you want to avoid hitting the shutter and moving the camera when you hit it, you can use a self-timer where it delays the trigger by about 3 seconds. So you've got it fixed on the tripod, you hit the trigger, in 2 or 3 seconds it'll take the shot so your hand's further away from the camera and it's no longer moving. To avoid the problem of touch disabling with gloves, we can buy a stylus or use buttons for the trigger. So I'll show you examples of that again in a sec. So some ideas to get the best shots. Composition. When we talk about composition, if you look online and look into photography theory, this is pretty basic stuff. They talk about the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds looks a little bit like this, like a noughts and crosses board. And they say that your points of interest should lie on one of those horizontal or vertical lines, and in some cases where they intersect. So if you can imagine, if you're taking a shot of a horizon, of a beach or something like that, or a beehive, maybe a horizon should be, rather than in the middle, but on that lower third or the top third line. And I've got a shot here, an example I took here of just a frame of honey with my jar of honey on the frame with the beehives in the background. So you can see I'm trying to point attention to the frame in the foreground, but mainly to the jar of honey in the background there. So it hits right on that intersect. Lighting. Any diffuse point light at your subject is a good idea, and shoot with the light behind you. Often I see people shoot something with the light behind the subject, and that can be good for effect, for a silhouette shot, but if you want to see detail of the image that you're trying to capture, you really need the light behind your shoulder facing the subject. So as far as macro sharpness is concerned, we can lock the exposure and the automatic focus on many cameras. And on a Samsung or an Android device, the one I use, I simply hold my thumb down on the image of where I want to lock it, and you'll see that little yellow symbol in this case comes up that says AF lock. AE lock, so it means auto focus, auto exposure lock. So that'll hit you right there, and then you can move your camera around in and out and it'll hold that lock. So if you want to take something very closely, or if a bee is moving, you get the lock only a few centimetres away from the lens, lock it down, and then you can follow the bee and get a shot. Using a camera trigger, you can use a stylus or setting in the preferences of the camera. On my phone, for example, it's got a volume key function where if I hit the volume key, it'll release a shutter and take the shot. So you don't have to worry about using gloves all the time, that you're not going to get the shot you need. If you set up your camera, think a little bit in advance, set up your camera like that, you can usually get a shot quite easily. So to make your shots a little bit steadier, you could think about getting some camera support, like a tripod, or using a Bluetooth trigger, like I've got in the bottom of this shot here. Editing. Use third-party apps. There's a lot of third-party apps around available that are free, apart from Instagram, which is probably the most practical one because it has the function to publish it on the internet plus the filters built into it. There are other free apps. Now, all these apps here, I did a little bit of research and they're all available for both Android and iPhone platform, and they're all free. Snapseed is probably one of my favourites, and Afterlight. Have a look around for these. They're quite easy to use once you get the hang of them. This is a screenshot of Snapseed. You can see there's a lot of functions there, tuning the images, cropping the image, adding colour effects, black and white, putting a vignette that's like a black halo around the shot, heaps of different effects, vintage. You can write over it with a brush and pen tool. A lot of free apps out there available for you to use. So that's one of the main advantages I think about a camera phone, is that it gives you all this editing in the palm of your hand. So DSLRs just don't do that. Another big advantage is storage. You can store your photos or videos in the cloud. Many people or teams, companies like Microsoft and Google have facilities. I'm not sure about Microsoft, but I know Google now offers unlimited storage for your photos and video. So all you need is a Gmail account, and it doesn't have to be a Gmail address. You just need a Gmail account registered to an email address, and you can have unlimited storage. I've got photos there for at least 5 or 6 years. The only drawback is it does scale them down to a resolution that's compressed, I guess. That is viewable, but maybe not the highest quality. But it's still a great resource to archive all your footage and all your photos. We might also think about perspectives and finding different angles to explore your options. So taking a frame of bees here with a queen cell, look at the angle sometimes that maybe a lot of people don't consider, an angle something like that. Or on the top bars of a hive. This sort of angle, I believe, is a little bit more interesting than just shooting overhead. Fill your frame to get up close rather than using a zoom. So this example of this pumpkin flower, unfortunately there was no bee hanging around, so I just had to get this quickly. But move up to your subject and get it to fill the frame. Use negative space and embrace it. So that means the focus of your subject doesn't always have to be in that rule I said about the thirds, the rule of thirds. Sometimes you can offset it and use a space to the right or to the left or somewhere else in the frame. That'll balance your shot. Look for reflections. A classic example is over water. I have a little bird bath that I fill with rocks that most people do, I guess, these days in their backyard. Makes a great shot of the bee reflected in the water. So usually I find if the water is, if it's dark, so if it's a dark base rather than a light base, you get a lot better reflection. Depth of field. So depth of field is a classic thing. A lot of photographers, professional photographers, talk about bokeh, spelt B-O-K-E-H, and that is a technique where you try to isolate your background from your subject. So in this case, the bee on a bit of lavender, that's right on top of a lavender bush, but because I've come in so close to the bee, everything else is blurry in the back, so I could have anything happening in the back there, and it's just a mix of colours and everything else is in focus that I want to be. Another shot of depth of field, a good example here would be something like this, uncapping some frames at a recent bee course we did at the club here. We got a gentleman in the background. I've obscured him a little bit by making it a bit softer so he's out of focus once again, where my subject, the hot knife there, is clearly sharp with the honey just draping over the blade of the knife. Look for abstracts sometimes. This is just a leaf of a palm tree. Sometimes it makes for an interesting shot. Maybe you want to use it as a background on your mobile phone or something. An abstract can be sometimes quite helpful if you get in really close and get a different perspective. So in summary, just experiment, have fun, and mobile phones can often capture those shots that you'll never get when you've got a DSLR or relying on a DSLR, because it's not obviously around in your back pocket all the time. Any questions at all? So the question was, are you able to store it in a higher quality image resolution? Is that what you're saying? Okay. You can if you drop them into a folder in your Google Drive, but Google Drive typically is only 15 gigabyte free storage, or 17 for some accounts. There is an unlimited or a 1 terabyte account that you can get, but it costs a bit of money every month. You can store all your high-res photos like that, but Google Photos used to be part of your Google Drive account. So before, if you had, for example, 5 gigabytes of photos, that would be taken out of your 15 gigabyte limit. Now it stores it separately, so you can have as many photos as you want and it doesn't affect your Google Drive storage amount. So, getting back to your question, if you want the high-res files, you'll have to create a separate Google Drive folder and store them in there. But your Google Photos will still be stored separately, unlimited, in another account, in the Google Photos account. That's a good point. I haven't used an iPhone for a few years. The gentleman up the front just mentioned that with an iPhone you can plug in an external cable into your headphone socket. Is that right? Oh, the headphones. Okay, great. Fantastic. So you can also use that as an option. Very good option. So the question was, can you buy a Bluetooth stick that you can give to your partner and they can use? I think I'm not one that uses selfie sticks and Bluetooth sticks very much at all, but I remember a few years ago I had one, and it did have a remote Bluetooth trigger on it, but it was pretty limited to what it did. Didn't focus or anything like that, it just took the shot. But there might be some other options around now. This is a few years ago, so you might have to do your research with that. Mini camera to a bee, is it possible? I think there have been some experiments. Actually, has anyone seen the film More Than Honey? There is a shot in there. It's interesting you should say that. They didn't theoretically attach the camera to the back of the bee, but they did attach the camera to the bee. And how they did it was, I'm not sure if you saw remember the part of the mating flight? You see a queen bee, and she's flying around, and you see all the drones come up and do their business, and then the other one falls off, and then the next one comes, and she's in the middle of the frame all the time. And when I saw it for the first time, I thought, how did they keep that? Is that animation? It looked too imperfect to be animation. So how they actually did that was they set a tripod up, and if you can imagine like a long rod, like a pool cue stick, and on the end of that pool cue was the queen bee that they attached to the tip of the stick. So the camera on the tripod was attached to the cue, and it just moved around in a circle, so the camera pointed in the direction and the bee moved at the same time. So you get that blurry background like the depth of field shots I was showing you there earlier, and the camera was fixed on the subject all the time. So they did attach the camera to the bee, but she bared no weight at all. I'm not sure exactly how ethical that is and if the bee suffered much, but that's how they got that shot. But as far as micro cameras, maybe there is something. I haven't seen anything. I've seen microchips, but not cameras. You can edit the JPEG. Some cameras, the question was, do you have to shoot in RAW to edit those photos? You'll always get better results if you shoot in a RAW camera file. So for those of you who don't know what a RAW camera file is, it's an uncompressed image, usually in a high resolution camera, can be 30 or 40 megabytes in size. where a JPEG is usually highly compressed. The same image might be 2 or 3 megabytes. So, yeah, in the editing apps that I cited today, all of them can edit in JPEG as far as I know. The ones I've tried at least, and I've tried 3 of them there, Snapseed, Afterlight and Photoshop Express, they all do, and Instagram does as well. So they can all be edited. All those JPEG photos can be edited in that app, yes. Okay, the question was, have I taken shots of queens laying eggs and that? I have tried a few things, haven't been too lucky getting the exact timing right. I generally, because I've got access to DSLRs and high resolution cameras, I generally would go for that option. I'm not too sure that you would get fantastic results with a camera phone, but that's not to say that you can't, because I know there's a lot of good camera options as far as macros are concerned, macro lenses. That's the ones that get in very close. There are some lenses, pretty good value for like $100, and that might be a lot for some people, but compared to a macro lens that you'll buy for a professional camera, it's quite cheap, and that'll usually get right in there. You could experiment, have a look around on eBay. There's a lot of different ones. Some of the ones I've tried on eBay, the $10, $20 ones, they're all pretty much garbage. But the ones I generally find the ones made in Germany and coming out of America and that are generally a bit better, but I couldn't name brands for you that escape me at the moment. Okay, I think that just about covers it. My time's up. Thank you very much for everyone for listening. I'll hand you back to Neal.